Mysterious reputation, sablog is slave ke baramain sunte the lekin koi usparbid karne ki himmat nahi karta, afwahen are dark rumors uske aspas hain. Unmatched beauty, slave ki physical beauty itni adbut haike usko dekkar log shak ho jate hain, or is wajase log usko apne pas rakna chate hain ya dar ke mare, avoid karte hain. Haunting past Slavika Purana Malik ya uske Purane Malik ke khandan se judi koi bayana kahani hai, jo sabko darati hai, unexpected intelligence, surf kubsurat nahi, balki ye slave bahutes or samajdar hai, jo plantation ke rules or dynamics, ko manipulate kar sakta hai, forbidden or akuch ic batin jo supernatural ya tabu lakti hain, jays ki koi curse, ya gatia incidents, jo logon ko rok dete hain. Hidden talents, slave ke pas a's hidden skills hain jo plantation master ke liye faida, ya hatra dono ban sakte hain. But what truly set her apart was not just her beauty, it was the palpable aura of danger, a whisper of something forbidden that clung to her like a second skin. No one dared bid. Murmurs passed through the crowd like a creeping fog, stories of previous owners ruined, of men driven to madness or despair, of inexplicable deaths and vanished fortunes. They said she carried a curse, though no one could say exactly what form it took. Some swore they had seen shadows move differently in her presence, or that the very air around her seemed to thicken with silent warnings. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, these dark tales, the plantation master felt a strange pull. Every fiber of his being screamed caution, but curiosity, lust, and a growing hunger for dominance over this enigmatic figure drove him forward. The gavel struck again, and he raised his hand, bidding more than anyone else dared whisper. Murmurs turned into gasps. Even those who had been silently observing felt a chill, as though some unseen force had approved the transaction. When the sale was finalized, and the slave handed over to him, a shiver ran down his spine. There was triumph in his acquisition, yes, but also a gnawing unease, a sense that by claiming her he had stepped into a story he could neither control nor escape. As she followed him off the platform, silent and composed, every step measured, the plantation master studied her closely. There was something in the tilt of her head, the way her eyes flickered with unspoken thoughts, that suggested she understood more than she let on. Perhaps she knew about the whispers, the fears, the dark stories. Perhaps she had learned to wield them. His mind raced, trying to place her in the familiar hierarchies of control and submission he had mastered over decades. Yet she defied classification. She was an enigma, a living paradox that teased the boundaries of power. Back at the plantation, the master introduced her to the sprawling estate, the fields that stretched endlessly under the oppressive sun, and the rows of quarters where other slaves moved about in a rhythm dictated by labor and fear. She observed everything with a quiet intensity, noting the weak points, the tensions, the alliances. Even in her silence, she seemed to exert influence, a subtle gravity that drew attention without effort. The other slaves watched her with a mixture of awe and apprehension, unsure whether to admire or fear her. Stories spread quickly of how she could charm the overseer with a glance or silence the kitchen staff with a simple lift of her brow. The plantation master, for all his experience, felt a thrill he had not known in years. She was more than a servant, she was a test, a challenge, a dangerous temptation that no man could resist, yet few could survive unscathed. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the cicadas filled the air with their relentless chorus, he found himself studying her, trying to decode her motives, her intentions, her secrets. The whispers of the crowd at the auction had not been idle gossip. They were warnings he would soon understand the full weight of. It was a slow, creeping realization, the kind that begins with a faint shiver and grows into a relentless chill. Beauty alone was a weapon, and she wielded it with devastating precision. The plantation master had acquired not just a slave, but a storm in human form, one that would challenge his authority, unearth old fears, ignite forbidden desires, and unravel the fragile order of his world. And in the quiet corners of the estate, where shadows fell long and secrets festered, he began to understand why no one else had dared bid for her. This was not a woman to own. She was a force, an enigma, a peril wrapped in perfection, and his mistake was thinking he could command her. From the moment the plantation master laid eyes on her, the air around the slave seemed charged with an invisible tension. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her reputation, a shadowed halo of whispers and rumors, that truly defined her presence. Across the auction square, murmurs had traveled long before she was brought forward. Men and women who had previously owned or come into contact with her were reluctant to speak, their silence more damning than any accusation. To bid on her was to court danger, and everyone knew it. It was said that her first owner, a wealthy but cruel trader, had died under suspicious circumstances shortly after acquiring her. No one could confirm the details. Some said a horse had thrown him, others whispered of an illness that struck suddenly, but in the market, stories became legend. By the time the slave reached the hands of the plantation master, she carried the weight of these stories like armor, and the power of her mysterious reputation became almost tangible. The plantation master was a man accustomed to control. He had managed countless slaves, navigated the treacherous politics of the plantation elite, and had seen his share of rebellion, trickery, and misfortune. Yet when faced with her, he felt a rare twinge of uncertainty. It was not fear of physical resistance, no, she had not so much as lifted a hand in defiance at the auction. It was the unspoken knowledge, the stories embedded in every sideways glance, every hesitant whisper, that unsettled him. She was more than a person, she was a story, a warning, a puzzle wrapped in the guise of flesh and bone. Every slave in the quarters had heard the rumors. They spoke in low tones about the strange events that had followed her from one owner to the next. Masters had fallen ill inexplicably, overseers had met untimely deaths, and neighboring plantations had whispered of tragedies that were always just beyond proof. It was a reputation built on coincidence, fear, and the human tendency to find patterns in darkness. Yet in the minds of those in the auction house, these stories became reality. They did not dare challenge it. To bid on her was to invite calamity, and no man in his right mind would take such a risk. What fascinated the plantation master most was how her aura of danger and mystery had been cultivated, whether by intention or by circumstance. It was clear from the first moment that she understood the power of her reputation. Her every movement was measured, her eyes calculating, her silence deliberate. She exuded confidence, but not arrogance. There was an intelligence behind the calm composure that suggested she knew the fears she inspired and was fully capable of manipulating them. She had learned early that fear could be as potent as beauty, perhaps more so. As he brought her to his estate, the plantation master began to understand the subtle ways in which her reputation shaped interactions. The other slaves were wary, giving her space that would normally have been unthinkable for someone newly arrived. Overseers treated her differently, less strictly, yet with a keen awareness that she was not to be provoked. Even the animals seemed to react to her presence. Horses would grow restless, dogs silent, as if sensing the invisible weight of her history. This mysterious reputation also affected the psychology of the plantation master himself. Men, no matter how experienced, are susceptible to fear when confronted with the unknown. The slave's history haunted him even as he told himself it was mere superstition. He began to second-guess decisions, wondering if the slightest misstep would provoke her, or worse, the curse of her legend. He had bought her for control and desire, yet with every passing hour he felt less like a master and more like a participant in a story he could not fully comprehend. But what truly made her reputation dangerous was the ambiguity that surrounded it. No one could point to a single definitive event that confirmed the dark tales. Each story was half truth, half imagination. This ambiguity created a vacuum in which fear thrived. People were afraid not just of what had happened, but of what might happen. The mind, confronted with uncertainty, fills in the blanks with the most terrifying possibilities. By simply existing under the shadow of these stories, she wielded power far beyond her physical form. The plantation master, despite his dominance and experience, found himself drawn to this very ambiguity. It was irresistible, a puzzle he was compelled to solve. He wanted to understand why she inspired fear, to pierce the veil of her mysterious past, to bend her to his will. This duality, danger and allure intertwined, became the foundation of the first chapter of their story. She was both a threat and an object of obsession, a living embodiment of the warning that had silenced the auction house. In essence, the first keynote reveals the primacy of reputation in shaping power dynamics. In a world ruled by fear and authority, her history and the stories surrounding it gave her influence even before she spoke or acted. Reputation became her silent weapon, a tool more potent than chains or whips. The plantation master's acquisition of her was not merely a purchase, it was the acceptance of an invisible force that would challenge every assumption he held about control, obedience, and desire. As the sun set over the sprawling fields of the plantation, the master began to see the first signs of her influence. The shadows lengthened, the wind whispered through the cane, and in every corner of the estate there was the sense of anticipation, an unspoken acknowledgement that the mysterious reputation of the woman he had bought was about to reshape his world entirely. She was not just a slave, she was a presence that could not be ignored, and the master would soon learn that no wealth, no authority, and no cruelty could shield him from the force of her legend. The moment she stepped off the auction platform and onto the grounds of the plantation, it was impossible not to notice her. She moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, each step measured and deliberate, as though she were aware of every eye that followed her. Her beauty was not just a matter of symmetry or delicate features, it was something deeper, more disarming. It carried a power that few could resist, yet even fewer dared to confront. For those who encountered her, it was as though the world itself paused to acknowledge her presence. It was this unmatched beauty that made her reputation all the more formidable. People often say that beauty is a blessing, but in her case it was also a weapon, a tool wielded with subtlety and precision. Plantation masters and overseers alike were unsettled, not because she resisted them outright, but because her very existence seemed to assert control over the environment. Where most slaves moved quietly through fear or obedience, she commanded attention without lifting a hand. Her eyes, dark and piercing, could communicate volumes without a single word. A glance could inspire devotion, curiosity, or dread, depending on the observer's mindset. The plantation master, a man who had long prided himself on his ability to dominate, was not immune. In her presence, he felt a tension unlike any he had experienced before. It was not merely attraction, it was the sense that her beauty carried an unspoken challenge, a test of his authority and composure. He had acquired her expecting to control, to possess, and to define her place within his estate. Instead, he found that every encounter with her required negotiation, calculation, and constant vigilance. Her beauty created an arena in which power was fluid, shifting, and unpredictable. Other slaves watched in awe and fear. They had grown accustomed to rigid hierarchies where obedience and labor dictated status and respect. Yet she disrupted these invisible rules effortlessly. Her presence elicited whispers, stolen glances, and sometimes even outright envy. The beauty she possessed was not fragile, it was formidable, almost predatory in its effect. She seemed to understand instinctively how to navigate the complex social dynamics of the plantation, using her appearance as both shield and weapon. It was clear that to underestimate her was to invite chaos. Her beauty also had a profound psychological impact on the men around her. For the plantation master, it was a constant torment. He was both drawn to her and aware that to indulge his desires without caution could be dangerous. Each conversation, each encounter, carried the weight of potential disaster. The other men on the plantation, overseers, visiting traders, even neighboring plantation owners, were similarly affected. Some tried to ignore her, while others struggled to maintain their composure, acutely conscious that her presence could destabilize the careful order of their lives. What made her beauty truly dangerous was its ability to inspire unpredictability. Unlike simple attractiveness, which might provoke desire, her allure demanded attention, respect, and caution simultaneously. She could appear innocent, even vulnerable in one moment, only to exude an almost imperceptible aura of command in the next. This duality made it impossible for anyone to categorize her, to predict her actions, or to assert dominance over her. In the eyes of those around her, she became a force of nature, beautiful, magnetic, and terrifying in its unpredictability. The plantation master quickly realized that he was navigating uncharted territory. In every interaction, he had to consider not only her behavior but also the ripple effects of her beauty on everyone else. Laborers were distracted, some by awe, others by fear. Overseers were cautious, unsure how far to enforce authority without provoking unknown consequences. Even the children of the estate seemed to instinctively recognize her power, keeping distance or watching with wide, uneasy eyes. Her beauty was not passive, it was active, influencing minds, emotions, and actions in subtle but profound ways. She also seemed to understand the psychological leverage of her appearance. There was a precision in her expressions, a calculation in the tilt of her head, the meeting of her gaze, and the hint of a smile that suggested she knew exactly how to manipulate perception. This was no mere coincidence, it was a form of strategy. The plantation master, despite his experience, began to see her beauty as a battlefield, where every glance and gesture carried potential victory or defeat. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect was the way her beauty blurred the line between admiration and fear. People were compelled to look, yet warned themselves to look away. Her presence created a tension that could not be ignored, a constant reminder that appearances in the world of the plantation were more than skin deep. They were instruments of power, influence, and survival. The master found himself both captivated and cautious, drawn to her radiance yet aware that each step toward indulgence could trigger unforeseen consequences. As the days passed, it became evident that her beauty was inseparable from the other forces she wielded, her reputation, intelligence, and mysterious aura. Together, they formed a web of influence that ensnared the plantation master and everyone else on the estate. It was a lesson he would learn again and again. In this woman, beauty was not simply adornment. It was an instrument of control, a key to social dominance, and a warning of the danger that came with underestimating her. In essence, the second keynote illustrates that unmatched beauty in a context of power imbalance is more than aesthetic, it is a tactical advantage. It reshapes hierarchies, alters behavior, and instills both desire and fear. For the plantation master, it became a source of obsession, a constant challenge to his authority, and a reminder that control was never absolute. Each day brought new lessons, as he grappled with the realization that beauty, in the hands of someone who understood its power, could rival even the strictest chains in its ability to dominate. By the end of the first week, the master understood the truth that others had long known: beauty alone can command the world, but it can also unsettle it completely. The slave he had purchased was not merely an object of desire. She was a presence that redefined the rules of his plantation, challenged his authority, and illuminated the fragile boundaries between power and vulnerability. Her beauty, unmatched and weaponized, would shape the unfolding drama in ways he could never have anticipated, and it would be the first of many forces he would struggle to contain. Even as the plantation master admired her beauty and marveled at her composure, there was an invisible weight she carried, a past so shadowed, so unsettling, that it had followed her like a specter from one auction to the next. This was not merely a history of ownership or labor, it was a haunting past, a collection of stories and events that created an aura no one could ignore. Those who had previously encountered her spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with fear and respect. Some whispered of tragedies that had struck her former masters, others of inexplicable accidents, illnesses, or disappearances. While many dismissed such tales as superstition, the consistency and detail of the accounts gave them a chilling credibility. From the moment she was born into servitude, her life seemed to attract misfortune. Childhood memories were scarce, and what little she remembered was marked by harsh lessons in survival, cruelty, and observation. Her first owner was a man known for both his wealth and his cruelty, yet even he had not anticipated the subtle ways in which the girl would unsettle those around her. Within months, his health had declined mysteriously, his fortune had begun to erode, and whispers of curses circulated among neighboring plantations. When he died suddenly, leaving the girl to the next owner, rumors solidified into legend. People began to say that she brought misfortune not by intent, but by the mere presence of her enigmatic spirit. It was not just her previous masters who were affected. Fellow slaves and servants observed patterns that seemed uncanny. Tools breaking unexpectedly, livestock behaving erratically, shadows moving in unnatural ways. These phenomena may have had rational explanations, Yet when they occurred in her presence, they were interpreted as signs of a supernatural resonance, a connection between her life and forces unseen. Even the plantation master, a man of practical habits and a hardened mind, could not escape the creeping sense that there was more to her than human frailty or coincidence. The haunting past also influenced her own behavior. She had learned early that mystery could be leveraged as protection. By keeping her history veiled in fragments and innuendo, she cultivated an aura of unpredictability. No one could say what she thought, what she feared, or what she might do next. Her silence was strategic, her glances suggestive, and her presence commanding. In this way, her past became a tool, a silent, invisible influence over everyone who dared come near her. By controlling what was known, she controlled the narrative, and by extension, she controlled the fears and expectations of those around her. For the plantation master, encountering her past was both fascinating and terrifying. Each story he heard, from former traders, from the hushed whispers of his own slaves, served to remind him that this was no ordinary acquisition. Ownership, he soon realized, was not about commanding her obedience alone. It was about navigating the legacy of shadows she carried with her. At night, he would think of the mysterious ailments, the sudden deaths, and the strange accidents that punctuated her life. Could he dismiss them as coincidence, or did they reveal a truth too unsettling to confront? His rational mind wrestled with the possibility that he was no longer the master but a participant, in a narrative he could not fully control. The haunting past was further amplified by the stories that spread faster than truth. By the time she arrived at his plantation, tales of her mysterious nature had traveled across counties. Some claimed she had predicted disasters, others that she had glimpsed secrets no ordinary person could know. Even the skeptical were unsettled, for the repetition and consistency of the stories created a psychological weight that could not be easily dismissed. The plantation master, proud and commanding in his own right, found himself increasingly preoccupied with these whispers. What if the legends held even a fragment of truth? What if the seemingly minor incidents he observed, the flicker of shadows, the sudden chill in a room, the quiet way animals reacted to her, were signs of forces beyond his understanding? Yet it was not only the past's mystery that held power, it was its relationship to the present. Each new day on the plantation brought subtle reminders that history could not be erased. Tools went missing or broke, servants hesitated in her presence, and even the natural environment seemed to shift around her. The wind through the cane fields carried an eerie tone, shadows lingered longer than they should, and whispers of the past seemed to echo in the rustling leaves. In these moments, the plantation master recognized a truth he could not deny. Her past was not dead, it was alive, influencing the world she now inhabited. This haunting past also shaped the social dynamics of the estate. Other slaves treated her with a mix of awe and fear. Overseers and laborers, who were usually brash and assertive, hesitated, uncertain how far to exert authority over someone whose presence seemed to unsettle the very fabric of their routines. The past became a lens through which her every action was interpreted. Even mundane acts, fetching water, tending the garden, walking through the fields, were imbued with significance. Observers expected misfortune, and in doing so, they allowed her to shape the plantation's daily life without resistance. Moreover, the haunting past created a psychological interplay between her and the plantation master. He was both drawn to her and wary of her, a duality intensified by the stories of misfortune. Each glance, each moment of silence, each subtle gesture carried the weight of history. He found himself questioning his own perceptions, wondering if he could trust what he saw or if he was being manipulated by fear and legend. Her past, shrouded in mystery, became an active player in their growing dynamic, a force that dictated terms before she even spoke. In essence, the third keynote underscores that the haunting past is more than history, it is power. It shapes perception, molds behavior, and manipulates expectation. Through her enigmatic past, the slave wielded influence over the master, the workers, and even the very environment of the plantation. Her beauty and intelligence were formidable, but it was the shadow of her history, the whispers of curses, misfortune, and inexplicable events, that made her truly untouchable. The plantation master had not merely bought a slave, he had inherited a legacy of mystery and fear, one that would define every encounter, challenge every assumption, and forever alter the fragile balance of his estate. By the end of the first month, he understood the chilling truth. Her past was alive, and it demanded recognition, respect, and caution. In the quiet hours, when the sun had dipped behind the horizon and the cicadas sang their endless chorus, he realized that no chain, no gavel, and no authority could contain the force of history that walked alongside her, whispering its dark secrets to anyone bold enough or foolish enough to notice. From the moment she arrived at the plantation, it became painfully clear that her beauty and reputation were only the surface of a far deeper, more formidable force, her extraordinary intelligence. While most slaves were expected to follow orders without question, and most masters assumed obedience equated to simplicity, she defied every assumption. Her mind was sharp, calculating, and ruthlessly observant, a weapon far more potent than chains or whips. The plantation master, accustomed to dominance and control, quickly discovered that her intelligence was not passive. It was active, strategic, and anticipatory, capable of reshaping every interaction on the estate. It began with small observations. She noticed patterns in the overseer's behavior, the schedules of work crews, and even the subtle alliances among other slaves. Nothing escaped her attention. While others toiled blindly, she catalogued, analyzed, and anticipated every shift in the plantation's social and operational dynamics. Her intelligence was not merely academic, it was practical and tactical, designed for survival and influence. Even before speaking a word, she had already mapped the territory, understood the vulnerabilities, and identified the levers she could pull to achieve her goals. The plantation master first realized the depth of her intelligence during the initial weeks of her labor in the fields. He expected obedience and quiet efficiency, yet she often completed tasks faster, more thoroughly, and with subtle innovations that even seasoned workers had never employed. Rather than merely follow instructions, she optimized processes, anticipating problems before they arose. It was a display of competence that impressed him, but it also unnerved him. He was accustomed to a world where control was unilateral. Her mind challenged that assumption. But her intelligence was not limited to efficiency. It was psychologically nuanced, enabling her to manipulate perception and expectation. She understood the fears, desires, and weaknesses of those around her, and she could exploit them without overt confrontation. Overseers who tried to assert authority found themselves subtly undermined by her calm demeanor and calculated responses. Fellow slaves, both awed and wary, observed her strategies in silence, unsure whether to emulate or avoid her. Even the plantation master, confident in his power, began to feel the subtle pull of her intellect. It was not domination in the physical sense, but control over attention, expectation, and influence. The kind of power that made authority itself feel precarious. Her intelligence was also adaptive. She read situations with uncanny accuracy, adjusting her behavior to suit the audience, timing, and stakes. With the master, she appeared obedient, yet engaged in a silent negotiation of boundaries. With other slaves, she could be inspiring or intimidating, depending on what was necessary to maintain her position. She seemed to understand the calculus of human behavior instinctively, predicting reactions and outcomes with startling precision. Each decision, each glance, each measured gesture revealed a mind that was always several steps ahead. Perhaps most dangerous of all was her ability to mask her strategies under the guise of compliance. The master, believing he held the reins of control, failed to notice the ways she subtly redirected his commands to her advantage. She could comply with an order while simultaneously asserting influence over outcomes, reshaping tasks, interactions, and perceptions to suit her ends. In effect, she turned obedience into an instrument of power, subverting the hierarchy without ever breaking the surface of expected behavior. Her intelligence extended beyond interpersonal dynamics to encompass the physical and logistical aspects of the plantation itself. She noticed weaknesses in the estate's defenses, inefficiencies in labor distribution, and overlooked details in resource management. She never acted rashly or maliciously, yet her observations created opportunities for subtle advantage. In every task assigned, There was an undercurrent of strategy, a suggestion, a shift, a pause, that reshaped the plantation's rhythm without anyone realizing the manipulation at work. For the plantation master, this intelligence was both intoxicating and terrifying. He had acquired her expecting beauty and obedience, but he was confronted with a mind that challenged his assumptions, resisted simplistic control, and introduced complexity into every interaction. His attempts at authority were undermined not by defiance, but by her anticipatory reasoning and tactical subtlety. He found himself constantly analyzing her, predicting her thoughts and recalibrating his own behavior, yet she remained several steps ahead. The realization dawned slowly, like a shadow creeping over a sunny field. He was no longer in absolute control, and he might never be. Her intelligence also allowed her to navigate the dangerous political currents of plantation life. She understood rivalries, alliances, and jealousies, and she could exploit them to maintain her own position. In a world where missteps could be fatal, she wielded knowledge and foresight as her shield. Every glance from a fellow slave, every whispered remark from an overseer, was observed, catalogued, and integrated into her understanding of the estate's social ecosystem. By mastering information, she mastered influence, often without anyone realizing it. Yet despite her strategic mind, she was not overtly confrontational. Her power was subtle, hidden behind the guise of calm obedience and silent observation. It was a form of intelligence that demanded recognition, but rarely asked for it. This made her unpredictable and dangerous. Those who underestimated her, or assumed that beauty equated to simplicity, were in for bitter surprise. For the plantation master, it became clear that her intellect was a force in itself, as formidable as any reputation or physical weapon. In essence, the fourth keynote demonstrates that intelligence can be a weapon as potent as beauty or reputation, especially in environments defined by control, hierarchy, and fear. The slave's mind allowed her to navigate peril, assert influence, and maintain autonomy, even within a system designed to suppress her. It reshaped power dynamics, unsettled authority, and made the plantation master realize that mastery over her would require far more than wealth, chains, or intimidation. By the end of the first month, the plantation master was faced with a sobering truth. Her mind was her most formidable asset, and no amount of experience or authority could easily overcome it. In the silent corners of the estate, where shadows mingled with whispered secrets, it became apparent that intelligence, keen, calculated, and unwavering, was the weapon that would dictate the pace and direction of the drama to come. From the very first moment the plantation master laid eyes on her, it was clear that there was more than beauty and intelligence at work. There was a forbidden aura, an invisible barrier that separated her from ordinary people and instilled both fascination and fear. This aura was intangible yet palpable, a presence that seemed to distort perception and unsettle those who approached too closely. It was as if the air around her carried warnings that were both subconscious and impossible to ignore. Even the seasoned auctioneers and hardened plantation men, accustomed to cruelty and hardship, felt a creeping unease when she stepped onto the platform. The whispers surrounding her were not merely about past misfortunes or clever manipulation. They hinted at something otherworldly, dangerous, or taboo. Stories circulated of masters who had been drawn to her charm only to suffer humiliations, misfortunes, or even sudden deaths. Some claimed they saw fleeting shadows that did not belong or heard voices in the dark when she was near. Others insisted that animals reacted to her presence unnaturally, with horses refusing to obey or dogs growling at nothing visible. These tales were never fully confirmed, yet their repetition gave them a weight no one could dismiss lightly. Her aura was forbidden because it transgressed social and natural laws. It challenged hierarchies, blurred the line between desire and fear, and forced those around her to confront instincts and impulses they had been trained to suppress. For the plantation master, this was particularly destabilizing. He was a man used to absolute control, yet her very existence made him question the boundaries of his authority. He noticed almost immediately that he was being tested, not through defiance or disobedience, but by the silent, almost mystical gravity she radiated. The forbidden aura also had a psychological effect on the other slaves. They admired her beauty, respected her intelligence, but also instinctively kept distance. It was as if they felt her capacity to disrupt not only social order but also personal safety. Whispers spread that she was not to be trifled with, that those who underestimated her paid a high price. In this way, the aura acted as both a protective shield and a tool of influence. People were drawn to her, yet instinctively wary, a combination that reinforced her enigmatic power. Much of this aura stemmed from her ability to command attention without effort. Every glance, every slight smile, every measured pause carried significance. The plantation master noticed that when she moved through the estate, people's behavior subtly shifted, conversations halted, tasks were delayed, and eyes followed her unconsciously. This was not mere charm, it was the manifestation of her forbidden presence. The aura suggested that she existed on a plane partially removed from ordinary human experience, making her simultaneously alluring and dangerous. The supernatural rumors surrounding her were never explicitly confirmed, but they fueled a growing tension. Neighbors, visiting traders, and even distant relatives spoke in hushed tones of inexplicable events tied to her past. There were tales of masters who had seen things in her presence, objects moving on their own, voices echoing in empty halls, shadows twisting unnaturally in candlelight. Whether real or imagined, these stories magnified the aura's effect, giving her influence that extended far beyond her physical presence. Even the plantation master could not dismiss the possibility entirely. He had witnessed subtle, unexplainable occurrences that seemed to confirm the warnings, if only partially. Her aura was also taboo in nature, representing forbidden knowledge and danger. In the rigid social structure of the plantation, slaves were expected to be subordinate, predictable, and invisible outside the tasks assigned to them. She defied every expectation, moving with self-possession, speaking when advantageous and observing when silent. Her existence challenged norms and, by extension, the authority of the plantation master and his overseers. The taboo nature of her aura was not merely about superstition. It was about the disruption of order, the breaking of unspoken social contracts that everyone relied upon to maintain control. Interestingly, her aura could shift subtly, amplifying when she wanted to impress caution, diminish when she wished to blend in, and intensifying when asserting influence. This control over perception was part of her genius. She understood instinctively how to use the unseen to her advantage. The plantation master soon realized that he was not merely acquiring a slave, but a presence that could manipulate reality, perception, and even morale, all without overt action. The forbidden aura functioned as both shield and weapon, ensuring that those who approached her did so with care and reverence. The effect on the plantation master was profound. He found himself drawn to her despite his fear, captivated by a presence that was both human and almost supernatural. He began to see her aura in every interaction, how she subtly influenced the behavior of the overseers, how the laborers' efficiency fluctuated when she was present, and how the very atmosphere of the estate seemed to respond to her mood. His authority, once unchallenged, now felt tenuous. Her presence reminded him that true control was elusive, and that some forces could not be dominated by wealth or fear. In essence, the fifth keynote demonstrates that the forbidden aura is an invisible but formidable power. It combines elements of fear, taboo, and fascination to create influence that operates beyond conventional methods of control. The slave's aura rendered her untouchable in practical terms. She could not be openly opposed without consequence, yet she could subtly dictate outcomes simply by being present. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, obedience, and predictability, this made her both irresistible and terrifying. By the end of her first month on the plantation, it was evident that the forbidden aura was not a superficial trait. It was integral to her identity and strategy. It reinforced her beauty, her intelligence, and her reputation, creating a synergy that magnified her influence over all who encountered her. The plantation master had purchased more than a slave. He had acquired a force that blurred lines, challenged authority, and carried the weight of both legend and taboo. In this way, her forbidden aura would shape every interaction, every choice, and every tension that unfolded on the estate, setting the stage for the dark, suspenseful drama to come. As the days unfolded on the plantation, it became increasingly clear that her power extended far beyond beauty, reputation, intelligence, or forbidden aura. She possessed hidden talents, subtle and carefully honed abilities that could either benefit the plantation master or threaten his control entirely. These were not the overt skills that anyone might expect from a slave, manual labor, obedience, or household chores, but rather specialized, almost uncanny abilities that allowed her to navigate complex social, physical, and psychological landscapes with astonishing precision. One of her most striking hidden talents was her acute observational skill. She could notice the smallest inconsistencies in behavior, catch fleeting expressions that revealed hidden intentions, and perceive alliances or resentments long before others did. While most people operated on surface-level interactions, she read between the lines, understanding the unspoken power dynamics that governed the plantation. For the master, this ability was both fascinating and terrifying. It meant that no secret, no hidden agenda, and no subtle maneuver could escape her notice. Her observational skill was paired with strategic memory. She remembered conversations word for word, minor slights and favors, and even seemingly insignificant events that could later be leveraged for influence or survival. This ability allowed her to predict actions, anticipate reactions, and plan several steps ahead in every social interaction. Where other slaves might be reactive, she was proactive, shaping outcomes before they even fully unfolded. The plantation master soon realized that his attempts at manipulation or coercion were often neutralized simply because she had foreseen them and adapted in advance. Another hidden talent lay in her physical grace and agility. She moved with such poise that it was almost impossible to predict her actions or intentions. Whether in the fields, the quarters, or the house itself, simple tasks, walking, bending, lifting, were executed with elegance, conserving energy while maintaining control over her surroundings. This physical acuity allowed her to navigate hazards, avoid accidents, and execute subtle movements that often went unnoticed by those around her. Her presence could dominate a room not just psychologically but physically, as every motion commanded attention and respect. Perhaps most unsettling for the plantation master was her talent for influence. She could subtly manipulate emotions, planting seeds of doubt, desire, or fear without ever speaking a confrontational word. Overseers, workers, and even his own family began to act in ways he could not fully predict, often bending toward outcomes that favored her interests. This influence was rarely overt, but its effects were unmistakable. By leveraging subtle cues, eye contact, tone of voice, posture, she shaped behavior and created alliances, rivalries, or tension as suited her strategy. Her hidden talents also included practical knowledge and survival skills that were unexpected for someone her age and status. She understood the workings of the plantation machinery, the rhythms of seasonal labor, and even the secret routes and safe spaces across the estate. This knowledge allowed her to operate independently, avoid punishment when needed, and even aid or manipulate others in ways that reinforced her influence. It was a form of practical genius that could be turned to the master's advantage, but only if he understood and respected her capabilities. What made these talents truly dangerous was their unpredictability and dual potential. The same abilities that could help the plantation master increase productivity, maintain order, or protect his property could also be used to undermine him, expose weaknesses, or manipulate outcomes against him. Every skill she possessed carried a dual edge, and he soon realized that the line between advantage and threat depended entirely on the choices she made. Her talents, unlike chains or orders, could not be commanded. They required consent, trust, or negotiation, making her influence nearly uncontrollable. Her talents were also enhanced by her strategic patience. She rarely revealed the full extent of her abilities all at once. Instead, she deployed them gradually, testing limits, observing reactions, and adjusting her tactics accordingly. This incremental approach ensured that she remained enigmatic and difficult to predict. The master, despite his experience, found himself constantly on edge, attempting to read signals that were deliberately subtle and often misleading. Every interaction became a game of strategy in which she almost always held the advantage. The psychological impact of these hidden talents cannot be overstated. Other slaves quickly recognized her capabilities and a mixture of fear, respect, and envy permeated the quarters. Overseers were cautious, aware that even minor mistakes could be noticed and potentially leveraged against them. And the plantation master, whose authority had always been absolute, found himself navigating a landscape in which control was negotiated, challenged, and subtly contested at every turn. Her talents amplified every aspect of her presence: beauty, intelligence, reputation, and turned the plantation itself into a stage where she was increasingly the dominant actor. Yet paradoxically, these hidden talents also created opportunities for cooperation. If the master approached her wisely, acknowledged her capabilities, and sought to integrate her skills into the running of the estate, she could be an invaluable asset. Tasks were completed with efficiency, tensions diffused subtly, and potential disasters avoided, all outcomes made possible by her awareness, foresight, and subtle interventions. The challenge, however, lay in recognizing her power without provoking her, and in negotiating a balance between control and trust, a balance the master had never before had to consider with any other slave. In essence, the sixth keynote illustrates that hidden talents are a silent but potent form of power. They extend influence beyond overt actions, create dual possibilities of advantage and threat, and demand recognition from those who would claim authority. For the plantation master, the realization was clear: he had acquired someone whose abilities could either elevate the estate to unprecedented heights or unravel his control entirely. The choice rested not in his hands but in hers, a fact that would shape every decision, every interaction, and every conflict in the chapters to come. By the end of her first weeks, it was evident that her hidden talents were more than mere skills. They were instruments of survival, negotiation, and domination. They complemented her beauty, reputation, intelligence, and forbidden aura, forming a synergistic force that ensured her influence was both pervasive and unassailable. The plantation master had learned, with growing unease, that underestimating her hidden talents could prove disastrous, while respecting them could provide unprecedented advantage, but never without risk. From the very beginning, it became painfully clear that the plantation master was not the only one orchestrating control. Beneath her composed exterior, she engaged in a psychological game that challenged his authority, manipulated perception, and subtly shifted power dynamics on the estate. Unlike overt rebellion or open defiance, this game was played in the quiet spaces of observation, thought, and suggestion, an invisible battlefield where every glance, word, and gesture carried weight. Her psychological mastery began with observation. She studied the master's routines, moods, and patterns, identifying vulnerabilities in both personality and habit. Every action he took, every command he issued, was catalogued mentally, allowing her to anticipate his reactions and respond in ways that maintained her autonomy while subtly influencing his behavior. In this sense, she never acted rashly. Instead, she operated several steps ahead, crafting outcomes without ever appearing confrontational. The plantation master, accustomed to unquestioned authority, found this both fascinating and unnerving. He was used to power being clear and hierarchical. He gave orders and they were executed, but with her, obedience was never straightforward. She complied when necessary, yet her compliance was layered with suggestion, ambiguity, and timing that ensured he was aware she retained agency. He could command her, but never fully dominate her will. Every interaction became a mental chess match, where the stakes were desire, control, and survival. A critical aspect of this psychological game was her use of silence and gaze. She could communicate volumes with a look, conveying defiance, curiosity, or subtle warning without uttering a single word. The master quickly realized that these nonverbal cues were not accidental. They were deliberate tools designed to provoke thought, uncertainty, and sometimes even obsession. A single glance could unsettle him, make him question his assumptions, and force him to reconsider his next move. Her silence, equally potent, created tension, anticipation, and a sense of unpredictability that kept him constantly on edge. Her game extended to manipulating perception of the surrounding world. Other slaves, overseers, and visitors were influenced indirectly by her behavior toward the master. Her reactions, subtle nods, fleeting expressions, or controlled body language could shift alliances, sow doubt, or inspire fear without her ever needing to speak openly. In effect, she orchestrated not only her interactions with the master, but also the behavior of everyone within the plantation's social ecosystem. Her psychological game was multi-layered: direct influence on him, indirect influence on others, and strategic management of perception and expectation. The master's own emotions became tools within this game. He was aware of the allure of her beauty, the intrigue of her reputation, and the danger suggested by her aura. But he had not anticipated how profoundly she could manipulate his own thoughts and feelings. Desire, caution, curiosity, and fear intertwined whenever he interacted with her, creating a constant internal conflict. She could provoke him to act rashly, hesitate unnecessarily, or overthink situations, often all within a single conversation. Her control was subtle yet absolute, a reminder that true power did not always rely on physical dominance. She also exploited timing and suggestion. Commands or requests were delivered with calculated delays, subtle inflections, or strategic ambiguity, ensuring that the master's response revealed more about his own tendencies than her actions ever could. Each reaction he had became a lesson for her, reinforcing the delicate balance of influence she wielded. By keeping him guessing, she maintained the upper hand in their ongoing invisible struggle for control. Another dimension of the psychological game was her ability to instill doubt and anticipation. The master could never fully predict her intentions. Was her compliance genuine or a tactic to test him? Was a glance playful, defiant, or manipulative? This ambiguity forced him to invest mental and emotional energy into interpreting her, distracting him from other matters and amplifying her influence. In this way, she wielded uncertainty as a tool, ensuring that he remained engaged and unsettled, a dynamic that reinforced her subtle dominance. Her mastery of the psychological game also extended to long-term planning. She did not seek immediate confrontation or gratification. Instead, she manipulated sequences of events, conversations, and perceptions to produce cumulative effects. Over days, weeks, and months, the master found that situations he thought he controlled were subtly shaped by her influence. By the time he recognized the extent of her manipulation, the outcomes were often already in motion, leaving him reactive rather than proactive. This keynote illustrates a profound truth about power dynamics. True influence often resides in the mind rather than in chains. While the plantation master held legal and physical authority, she controlled the subtler realms of thought, emotion, and perception. He was forced to navigate her layers of strategy, constantly second-guessing himself and recalibrating his behavior. His attempts at domination were repeatedly complicated by her ability to read, anticipate, and guide his actions, sometimes with nothing more than a look or a carefully timed gesture. By the end of the initial weeks, the plantation master was confronted with an unavoidable realization. His psychological dominance was limited. He could compel labor, enforce rules, and punish transgressions, but he could not fully master the terrain of her mind. She had claimed subtle authority over him simply by understanding how to wield perception, suggestion, and timing. In effect, she had transformed the power dynamic of the plantation, demonstrating that intelligence, patience, and strategic subtlety could rival and even surpass physical and hierarchical control. In conclusion, the seventh keynote underscores that psychological mastery is a force that can destabilize even the most rigid hierarchies. Through observation, timing, suggestion, and manipulation of perception, the slave maintained influence over the master while navigating danger, securing autonomy, and asserting authority. The psychological game she played was silent yet omnipresent, shaping every interaction and setting the stage for future conflicts, alliances, and drama. The plantation master had acquired more than a slave. He had entered a battle of minds, one in which victory would be determined not by chains, but by wit, strategy, and the subtle art of control. As the days passed on the plantation, it became increasingly evident that her presence extended far beyond her direct interactions with the master. Her beauty, intelligence, reputation, forbidden aura, hidden talents, and psychological mastery created ripple effects throughout the entire estate, influencing everyone who lived and worked there. The other slaves, overseers, and household staff could not escape the subtle yet relentless impact of her presence. Envy, fear, and tension became constant companions, reshaping the social fabric in ways the master himself had never anticipated. From the first day, the slaves noticed a profound difference in how she moved through the quarters and fields. While most new arrivals were met with suspicion, indifference, or outright hostility, she commanded attention without demanding it. Her interactions, carefully measured and precise, suggested both competence and superiority, triggering envy among other slaves. Those who had spent years trying to secure favor or recognition found themselves overshadowed almost immediately. Even minor accomplishments of theirs seemed diminished in comparison to her poise, skill, and presence. Whispers and sideways glances became frequent, and the subtle undercurrent of jealousy began to permeate daily life. Fear accompanied envy, and it was equally potent. Many slaves were aware of the rumors surrounding her past, the mysterious deaths, the accidents, the strange occurrences that seemed to follow her. Even if they did not fully believe in the supernatural aspects, they respected the possibility that crossing her could lead to trouble. Fear manifested in obedience tinged with caution, in avoidance of confrontational behavior, and in heightened alertness during her presence. This combination of admiration and apprehension ensured that she could navigate the plantation without overtly asserting authority, yet maintain influence over her peers. The overseers were equally affected. Tasked with maintaining order and productivity, they found themselves operating under constant scrutiny, not just from the master, but from her. Subtle shifts in behavior, fleeting expressions, and strategic compliance allowed her to manipulate perception, making them second-guess their actions and intentions. Overseers who had previously relied on fear and punishment to maintain control discovered that she could neutralize their authority without a single word. This created tension, frustration, and an uneasy awareness that their position was less secure than they had assumed. Her impact was not limited to social dynamics alone. It affected productivity and morale. Laborers distracted by envy or fear performed tasks with varying efficiency. Minor mistakes or delays often occurred not because of negligence, but because of the invisible pressure she exerted. Observers noticed that while she worked diligently, others struggled to maintain composure, their focus disrupted by the unspoken hierarchy she had established. The plantation master, focused on results, began to recognize that her presence was reshaping the estate's operational patterns, subtly influencing outcomes even when she was not directly involved. The psychological tension she created also amplified social alliances and rivalries. Slaves began to jockey for position, attempting to align themselves with her favor or at least remain unnoticed in her shadow. Some tried to imitate her behavior, hoping to capture a fragment of her influence, while others kept distance, wary of invoking her disapproval or inadvertently incurring consequences. This created a dynamic web of relationships, layered with envy, fear, respect, and opportunism. Every interaction on the plantation was now filtered through the lens of her presence, and the invisible power she wielded intensified the drama and complexity of everyday life. Even the master could not ignore the ripple effects of her influence. He observed changes in behavior among his staff and slaves, recognizing that some tensions he had previously managed through discipline or oversight were now being subtly redirected by her. He began to see patterns emerge: favoritism, subtle manipulation, strategic silence, that suggested she was orchestrating social dynamics to her advantage. His authority was still intact in law, but in practice he was no longer the sole arbiter of order. Her influence had created a secondary hidden hierarchy that operated alongside his formal control. The combination of envy and fear also reinforced her forbidden aura and psychological mastery. As others grew cautious, respectful, or wary, they inadvertently ceded power to her. She required neither threats nor displays of dominance. The tension she created was enough to secure cooperation, attention, and influence. Even small gestures, a glance, a sigh, or a subtle tilt of the head, could shift the emotional atmosphere of a room, affecting multiple individuals simultaneously. In this way, she turned intangible forces into tangible outcomes, maintaining a position of dominance without overt confrontation. These dynamics intensified the dark atmosphere of the plantation. The estate, once defined by the predictable rhythms of labor and control, became a place where tension simmered beneath the surface. Shadows in the quarters seemed longer, whispers carried weight, and the unseen influence of her presence created a subtle unease. The master, though focused on material and operational concerns, could not ignore the psychological undercurrents. He recognized that her power extended beyond obedience or rebellion. She had inserted herself into the very fabric of the plantation's social and emotional life. The impossible mystery of the Ohio slave who lived to 126 years. The legend of that stormy birth endured not because of superstition alone, but because it marked the absolute domination of one who had once been powerless, and the emergence of a new force in the lineage of Blackthorn Manor. Every scream, every crash of lightning, every candle that fell and was replaced by silence testified to one immutable truth: the abominable slave had given birth not just to a child, but to a revolution that would echo through generations, whispered by those who dared to remember. The child, born amid storms and shadows, grew into a figure of whispered legends. By the time decades had passed, the townspeople had forgotten many details of the events at Blackthorn Manor, but no one forgot the presence of the abominable slave and the child she had raised. Even in the absence of written records or formal histories, memory preserved her story, cloaked in fear, awe, and reverence. The child's existence became a matter of rumor, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. Some said the child could speak to animals, that horses bowed at their approach, that birds followed like shadowed messengers through the air. Others claimed that the child carried the power of the storm itself, that even the weather bent to their will in subtle ways. Sudden winds, lightning strikes, or unnaturally calm nights seemed to signal the child's moods or intentions. Mothers told their children not to venture near the manor, warning that even glimpsing the child could alter their fate. The abominable slave, now fully recognized as the mistress, protected the child fiercely. No outsider, no servant, and no family member dared challenge her. The plantation had been transformed under her guidance. Cruelty was not eliminated, for the world would not allow it, but it was restrained, disciplined, and reshaped by her iron hand and sharp intellect. She had learned over decades that survival required more than power. It demanded cunning, patience, and the ability to anticipate threats before they arose. Despite the child's protection, fear persisted. Tales of the child's supernatural abilities spread beyond the county, reaching neighboring plantations and towns. Traders passing through whispered warnings to their peers. Travelers spoke of glimpses of the child in the windows at twilight, of shadows stretching unnaturally across the halls, of strange phenomena in the fields that seemed impossible to explain. Some who dared approach Blackthorn Manor claimed to feel an invisible weight, a presence that pressed down on their shoulders and forced them to speak or act in ways they would not otherwise. It was a presence that carried the authority of both the living and the dead, a power inherited from the abominable slave, honed through years of endurance and control. Even the master, Edward, remained bound to the house. He no longer ruled, no longer dared interfere. He existed in quiet compliance, his authority hollowed out by the realization that the abominable slave now commanded everything. He was a man who had once believed himself untouchable, now reduced to a witness of events he could neither influence nor fully comprehend. Margaret, the returning mistress, had long since left, her authority eroded by years of absence and by the undeniable rise of the woman who had taken her place. The legend of the child also served a practical purpose. The abominable slave used it as a shield. Rumors of supernatural abilities deterred the curious and the ambitious. No one wanted to test a power they could neither measure nor challenge. It created a buffer of fear around the child and the plantation itself, ensuring that the abominable slave's control remained unbroken. What the world perceived as magic or curse was in reality a strategic use of fear and perception, a testament to the intelligence and foresight of a woman who had survived every attempt to destroy her. As the child matured, townspeople claimed to witness events that defied logic. They said crops flourished in unusual patterns, that livestock moved as if anticipating commands, that illness and disease bypassed the estate's boundaries in inexplicable ways. Some believed the child had become a conduit for divine or supernatural intervention. Others whispered that the child had inherited the wrath and cunning of the abominable slave herself. Regardless of interpretation, the legend solidified. Blackthorn Manor had been altered forever, and no outsider would ever again control it as before. Within the walls of the manor, the abominable slave ensured the child was educated not only in survival and intellect, but also in the art of command. The child observed how authority was exercised, how fear could be measured, how loyalty could be earned or extracted. Every action of the adults around them, from workers to remaining family members, served as a lesson. By the time the child reached adulthood, they were no longer just the offspring of a slave. They were the heir to a legacy of power, cruelty, cunning, and resilience. They understood instinctively how to protect themselves, how to command without violence when possible, and when necessary, how to strike decisively against threats. Stories of their deeds spread through whispers and letters, reaching areas far beyond the plantation. Some claimed the child confronted intruders with the calm assurance of someone centuries old. Others swore that simply meeting the child's gaze instilled obedience or terror. These accounts, whether true or exaggerated, ensured that Blackthorn Manor remained untouched by outsiders. Its legend alone became a deterrent more effective than any physical fortification. Yet, as time passed, the abominable slave continued to teach, guide, and protect. She was aware that the child would eventually inherit the full weight of the plantation's authority, and she knew the world would test them ruthlessly. So she passed on not only knowledge of strategy and control, but also the lessons of endurance and psychological mastery that had allowed her to survive decades of brutality. The child learned how to navigate fear, harness loyalty, and turn superstition into a tool of influence. By the end of her life, the abominable slave had ensured that her legacy would endure. The child would be more than an heir. They would be a legend in their own right, bound to a power inherited not from birthright alone, but from the resilience, intelligence, and cunning of a woman who had defied every expectation and claimed authority from a world designed to deny it. The town continued to whisper about them long after, unsure whether they were blessed, cursed, or both. Even decades later, Blackthorn Manor remained a place of stories that blurred the line between history and myth. The abominable slave's child became a figure whose influence extended far beyond the plantation, a symbol of survival and power that no rumor, no superstition, and no adversary could erase. Their life proved that legends are not simply created. They are forged in blood, endurance, and unyielding determination, witnessed by those who dared to watch, whispered by those who dared not interfere, and remembered by a world that could not forget. The abominable slave, once powerless, had given birth to something eternal, a force that reshaped not only the plantation, but the very notion of who could hold power in a world built to deny them. And through it, her story, and the story of her child, became immortal in the fearful reverence of everyone who had the misfortune or privilege of witnessing it.